Hey everyone, it's Jenny and welcome back to my channel, This Story Ain't Over. I know it's been a minute since my last video. I've been taking a bit of a break, but I'm back now and I thought what better way to come back than with the mid-year book freakout tag. So this is the tag that basically everyone in the book community does during this mid-year period of the year. It's my absolute favorite tag to do because it just really sums up your reading for the first half of the year. And I know I'm a little bit late to this, but I cannot wait to talk about all the books I've read this year. So according to my Goodreads, I've read 37 books so far this year. It's a little bit behind my goal at the moment because I do want to try and read 100 books this year. My goal last year was way less ambitious because I just knew I was really busy. But this year I am equally as busy, but I just really want to try to read a lot more this year. And so that's why I was hoping to get to about 50 books by this point in the year, but it's okay. There's still so much time to go. And I feel like I do a lot of reading towards the end of the year as well. So with all that said, let's get into the different questions in this tag. So question number one is, what's the best book you've read so far in 2022? So I have a bunch of books for this one. 3 in specific that I just can't stop thinking about and that have just consumed me body and soul and that I want you all to read. So those books are Kaigei, which will not come as a surprise to any of you who have been watching my channel for a while. This is by Vaishnavi Patel. I read this as an ARC earlier this year before it came out in April and absolutely fell in love with it and have been shouting from the rooftops about this book to everyone on my channel but also on my Instagram. And a lot of you have been tagging me on your posts on Instagram telling me that you picked up this book because of me, which just makes me so freaking happy and just makes my heart swell. And I honestly just gain a year on my lifespan whenever one of you picks up this book because of me. So continue to do that. Continue to tell me when you guys have picked this up because of me, because yeah, I feel like this is my book. This is my all-time favorite. Nothing compares to it. And I feel like it sums up so much of my personality as well and things I love in books as well, that it's just like top tier. I also really love the author of this book. I know her in real life now and she's just absolutely amazing and wonderful, so I just want all the good things for her. But for those of you who don't know what Kaigei is about, it is basically a feminist retelling of the Ramayana, which is this ancient Hindu epic, and it involves these like great heroes and gods and heroic journeys, but a lot of the female characters in the epic aren't necessarily treated or shown in the best light. And so this book takes a specific queen from the epic named Kaigei, who is traditionally seen as like sort of the evil stepmother type of character. And in this book, we get to see her perspective. We get to follow her from when she's a child until she's much older and, you know, through the events of the Ramayana. And it's just a fantastic book. If you love mythological retellings, if you loved Circe by Madeline Miller, this is the book to pick up. It's also just a heartwarming book if you love books about women helping other women. It's just fantastic. All right, the second best book of 2022. Well, I can't really rank these because all these books are fantastic, and this is by no means like a judgment on their quality. This is just like personally how I feel about them, how they have touched me. But this is honestly like next, like right close below Kaigei for me, and that is All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. This book, guys, was just everything and more than I was expecting it to be. This is Sabaa Tahir's first ever contemporary novel, and I have just been waiting so long to hear the story because it's based off of parts of her own personal life and growing up in the Mojave Desert. And I knew as soon as she announced this book that I was gonna probably love it, but I was kind of scared to jump into it. When I first got the ARC, I was like, I don't know, am I gonna love this? Is it gonna live up to all my expectations? And honestly, guys, it did. It was fantastic. It is one of the most heart-wrenching, soul-rending books you'll ever read. The things that the two main characters go through in this book just had me in tears, crying, and we'll get to the books that made me cry, but this was definitely one of them. And if you are the type of person who loves YA contemporaries, this is like the epitome of all YA contemporaries. Like, it is just so fantastic, does everything so well, and I think it was just such a heartbreaking story and also a hopeful one as well. And I love that it was slightly a generational story as well. We get a bit of the story from an older character in the main character's lives, and she really added another layer to the story, which I loved. So if you're looking for a really beautiful story about slightly star-crossed lovers chasing an American dream, this is the book to pick up. And then the final book that is probably one of the best ones I've read of this year so far is, of course, Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is the memoir by Chanel Miller, who was previously known as Emily Doe, so the anonymous victim in the Stanford sexual assault case. This is the case also known as People versus Brock Turner. I honestly didn't really follow the case as was happening in real time. I think I read about it more afterwards, but this book I picked up kind of on a whim because a lot of people had mentioned that they had read it when it first came out a few years ago. Was just so captivated by Chanel Miller's, storytelling and writing and her telling her truth. And this is a very difficult read for anyone, but also it's very triggering for someone who has gone through anything similar to this situation, so I would be careful of that. But it was honestly so amazing, so well done, and I'm so glad that she told her story. This is like one of the most powerful books I've read in a very long time, and it's one that's going to stay with me. I personally don't read biographies or memoirs all that often, but every now and then there's one that comes along and blows me away like this one did, and I'm just so happy I read it. And it's honestly something I think about all the time. It's something that I'm gonna like shove at every person I know to read because it really opens your eyes, I think, just to the legal system. And it's all these things that we know, but it's just like getting to see it from a first person perspective from someone who has gone through all of it really opens your eyes, I think. Alrighty, next question is best sequel you've read so far in 2022. So weirdly enough, I have not been reading a lot of series recently. I feel like I've started a lot of series, but I've struggled to actually continue with many of them. I rarely get on to the second book, but there's one series that I did actually read quite a few books in this year, and I did a whole video on that series. And that series is the Bridgerton books by Julia Quinn. So as many of you may know, Netflix flew me out to LA in February to react to early scenes of season 2 of Bridgerton. It was the coolest experience ever. I have a whole vlog on it. I also have a whole video of me reading the first 5 books in the Bridgerton series and sort of giving you my review and thoughts on each of them. So go check that out if you want more in-depth thoughts on these. But yeah, in terms of sequels that I've read this year, these are actually the only sequels that I read, but they were honestly so great and I loved them. Particularly, I loved the second book, The Viscount Who Loved Me, which is Antony's story, which is the basis for season 2. And then I also really, really loved An Offer from a Gentleman, which is Benedict's story. And this one I don't know which season it's going to be the basis of because they have announced that they're skipping this book and going to the next one and then coming back to this later. So it might be season 4 or 5, who knows? But I really, really loved this book and the love story in this one and the main character in this one. So overall, these were just really, really fun books to read and a fun romance series to just binge if you're feeling it. If you are a fan of Bridgerton, highly recommend checking out the other books because it does give you the same vibes. There are a lot of changes between the books and the show, but it's still a lot of fun in my opinion. But if you want to get like a sense of each of the books, go check out the video that I did on it. Alright, next question is favorite reread. Many of you who have been following my channel for a while, you probably know that I don't actually reread books all that often. I've always had this habit since I was a kid. I'm always looking for new books to read, but I rarely ever reread old books. And oftentimes I find that when I reread books, I get sort of bored and tired of it the second time around because I know it's gonna happen. I'm definitely one of those people who like am motivated to finish something because I want to know how it ends. But as soon as I know how it ends, I'm like, okay, I don't need to like go through this entire thing again because I have this like tendency to want to like skip through to the good bits. So that's why I don't reread books all that often. But this year I did reread one book, and that was The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. And honestly, this is like one of the best rereads I've ever done. I have reread a few books over the past few years, and oftentimes, again, like I get kind of bored with them and I'm skipping to the good bits, that kind of thing. But this book, I read it front to back, every page, and loved every single moment of it. I think what was nice about this time when I reread it was that I was reading it physically this time, whereas the first time I had actually listened to it on audiobook. Both times were fantastic. The audiobook is also fantastic, highly recommend, but it was a different kind of experience reading this physically because I was seeing the words on the page and I was sort of tabbing certain parts of the book and, you know, highlighting different lines, and it was really a different way of engaging with the text, which I loved. And this is also just a fantastic book. I actually read it last year, so it hasn't been that long since I read it, but I just enjoyed it so much. It's such a heartbreaking and beautiful love story, a bit of a star-crossed lovers type of thing. If you like The Notebook, it's very similar to that, but with very different characters in a different setting. It starts out in 1950s Iran with these two teenagers who sort of fall in love before they are ripped apart because of, you know, very frustrating circumstances and also, you know, political upheaval and all of these different things going on. And they're reunited later on and trying to figure out what happened in between. And you're following the characters, you know, over their lives, and it's just such a expansive and beautiful and heartbreaking story. Highly recommend if you haven't read it yet. We read this for the Read and Color book club in March, so yeah, I just loved every minute of it, and I also really loved discussing it with Hannah from A Clockwork Reader for our live show for that month. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out. If you have read this book, there's a lot of spoilers, but it was such a great discussion and I loved hearing Hannah's thoughts. Alrighty, the next question that I'm going to be answering is one that's not actually usually on this tag, but I was watching Kayla's version of this video, Books and Lala, and she added this question in because she thought it was like an interesting thing to talk about. And that question is, what genre have you been reading or loving the most in this first half of the year? So I found this question really interesting because I feel like my reading taste has changed a lot this year, especially compared to previous years where I was mostly reading YA, and it was either like YA fantasy or YA contemporary. This year, almost all of the books I've been reading have been adult books. There's been very few YA, which is very different for me, and I've been really enjoying it. But I have noticed even in adult books, I have been reading a lot of literary fiction and also a lot of romance as well. The Bridgerton series like took me over the edge with a lot of romance, but I've been reading other romances as well, and I've been reading some other literary fiction, and it's been a nice time so far. I am still in a bit of a love-hate relationship with literary fiction because I've had a lot of duds, namely Sally Rooney, but there have been some that I really, really love as well. So I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, but I do think there's a lot more literary fiction books that I want to read in the future, so I'm hoping that I'll end up warming up to the genre a little bit more. But that's where I'm at. I would love to hear what genres you guys have been reading more of lately. The next question is a new release that you haven't read yet, but that you want to. So I have 3 books for this question, and I feel like I just have a lot of books that I want to get to that I haven't read yet, mainly because I feel like I've been discovering a lot of new books this year, like especially in the adult space. So that's why there's a lot, but the 3 main ones that I can think of right now that were kind of on my bookshelf that I have physically are, first off, The School for Good Mothers by Jessamine Chan. This one is a bit of a sci-fi fantasy, I believe, but basically it follows this single mother who is sort of kidnapped or taken to this like school for good mothers where they test if you are a good mother. I don't think I'm explaining this right, and I might be wrong, but this is sort of the general concept. It just seemed like such a weird and interesting concept, and I also just love that it considers this idea of motherhood, and I've heard some good things about this as well. The next book is one that I basically know nothing about, but the cover looked gorgeous, and I've heard a lot of people say that they love this one recently, so I wanted to pick it up, and that is Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This author has written a couple other books that people love as well. The one that comes to mind is Station 11, which I haven't read yet, but I really, really want to, and I've been meaning to pick it up for years now. And this is her newest book, and I, again, know nothing about it, but I saw that it was on sale at the bookstore, so I decided to pick it up. And I've heard a lot of people say some really great things about it, and since I've been reading a lot more adult fiction, I thought that she would be a great author to sort of dive into, so I really want to get to this one at some point this year. Alright, this next one is one that seems super, super cool and seems like a mashup of a bunch of my favorite things, and that is The Hacienda by Isabel Canes. And this one I basically know nothing about, but it was a book of the month pick. But basically what the inside cover says is that it's Mexican Gothic meets Rebecca in this debut supernatural suspense novel set in the aftermath of the Mexican War of Independence about a remote house, a sinister haunting, and a woman pulled into their clutches. That sounds so cool to me, and honestly, I personally loved Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. Sylvia Moreno Garcia in general is just one of my favorite authors ever, and I discovered her last year and fell in love with her writing, and specifically Mexican Gothic was one of my favorites. So anything that gives me similar vibes to that book is something I need in my life. I really, really love haunted house stories and Gothic stories. I love The Haunting of Hill House, Mexican Gothic, like all of these types of stories. Really hoping that this one's gonna live up to my expectations, but we'll see. If you've read this one though, let me know. Alrighty, this next question is one that's not actually part of the tag, but I decided to add it on because I thought it was an interesting thing to talk about since I feel like this happens to me a lot. But based on the previous question, what's a new book that you wanted to read but that you're not so sure about anymore? So I feel like this happens to me all the time whenever I have like anticipated releases that I'm really excited for. I'll start off the year like, oh, I really want to read this, and then the book will come out and I'll see a bunch of reviews and it will be like totally trash and like really low ratings and all this. And not that I think you should, you know, always take a rating or review at face value and not form your own opinion, but I do feel like my time is precious and I don't want to be wasting time picking up books that I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna like based off of people who have very similar, you know, tastes as me who have read the book. So 2 books that have come up recently that I feel like I'm unsure about now are, first off, The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. So I don't really read that many thrillers that often, so this one still might be a hit for me. But I've heard a lot of people saying that this one wasn't as great as the author's previous book, which was The Guest List and The Hunting Party, I think. I know The Guest List was a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, and that's mainly the reason why I wanted to pick up this one, because it was the newer release. This one I've actually started, and it's starting to show more promise. At the beginning I wasn't sure, but it's starting to show more promise as I'm getting into it. But again, I'm still not sure. We'll see how it goes, but I've heard a lot of not great reviews about this one, or like lukewarm reviews about this one, so that's why I was a bit unsure about it. The next book that was an anticipated release for me that I'm not so sure about anymore is Book of Night by Holly Black. This, I feel like, is not a very spicy opinion anymore because a lot of people have been talking about how much they did not like this book, but this is Holly Black's new adult novel. She's the author of the Cruel Prince series and a bunch of other YA books that I actually really love. I love her writing style. I think she's a fantastic writer, has some incredible characters, but I actually got an arc of this quite a few months ago before this release, and I tried to get into this and start this book, but I just couldn't get into it for some reason, and so I put it down. But I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm just not in the mood for this. I'll pick it up later and I'll still like it. And then all the reviews started to roll in about this book when it came out, and most of them were negative and lukewarm and not great. A lot of people had high expectations for this book and they were just not met. And so based off of that, I feel like I'm not so sure if I want to read this anymore. Based on the fact that I already tried to start it and couldn't really get into it, I feel like I'm probably not going to enjoy it as much. But this is where I leave it to you guys. Let me know if you have read this and if you liked it, what you thought of it, if you think I should spend my time and actually read it and form my own opinion, or if you think it's not worth my time and that I should just let it go. Alrighty, next question is an easy one. So what's your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? So I have two for this one. The first one is obviously Babel by Rebecca Kwong, or R.F. Kwong. She is the author of the Poppy War series, one of my all-time favorite series ever. You know, a lot of people's favorite series ever, so I'm so excited for her next piece of work. I believe this one's a dark academia of some kind, I think, but I'm not really sure. It's called Babel. That's about all I know. It's got a pretty diverse main cast, and I'm just really excited to read it and see how it goes. I do have an arc of it, a digital arc of it, that I'm hoping to pick up soon, but I'm hesitant because I'm like, I have such high expectations of this, so I really hope I'm not disappointed. And then the other anticipated release that I have for the second half of the year is What Souls Are Made Of by Tasha Suri. And this is another installment in this like series of retellings of like old classics, like old white classics with like diverse authors writing, you know, diverse characters into these stories. So this one is a retelling of Wuthering Heights with South Asian main characters, which has me super excited because one, Wuthering Heights is one of my favorite classics ever. All of the lines in it are so epic, and I just love how angsty and dramatic it is. So the second I found out that Tasha Suri was doing a retelling of Wuthering Heights, I was like, I need this in my life now. So this is coming out, I think, in July, or maybe around the time that this video goes up. So I'm really excited for it. I already pre-ordered it and I cannot wait to pick it up. Alrighty, the next question is your biggest disappointment of the year. So I have two for this one. So the first one is Real Easy by Marie Rukowski. This one was one of my most anticipated releases of the year, mainly because I really love the author Marie Rukowski. I have read one of her previous YA series, which is the Winter's Trilogy. Really love that one. This is her first ever adult novel, and it's a thriller, and based off the concept, it seemed really interesting. It's basically about a murder that happens involving this community of strippers, and it seems super cool on the outset, but when I started reading it, it honestly didn't live up to my expectations. And even though I don't really read a lot of thrillers that often, I still didn't feel like this one was as engaging as some of the other ones I've read, and it also, the reveals weren't as great as some of the other thrillers that I've read. So it just didn't live up to like what I know of thrillers and also what I expected of this in general. I just wanted more out of it, I think, and it did have some interesting characters and like some really cool bits to it. I by no means think it's a bad book, but it definitely wasn't like a 5-star the way I was expecting it to be. And then the other book that kind of really disappointed me was The Secret Keeper of Jaipur by Alka Joshi. This is Alka Joshi's second book, and it's a companion to her first book, The Henna Artist, which is one of my favorite books of, I think, 2020. It was such a fantastic book, such a wonderful sort of literary fiction following this one woman in 1950s India. And this book is a companion that happens many years later and follows some of the side characters, but also the same character from the first one. And I guess what disappointed me about this one was that I thought it was going to be a whole new story about one of the side characters, Malik, but it ended up being like sort of a mishmash of multiple stories. And there's particularly one character in the story that I really just didn't like, and I didn't really like reading from her perspective. And so I think overall it just felt sort of disjointed and not as great as the first one was. And it was like sweet and cute by the end, but I just didn't really love what she had done with the characters. I feel like it was the extended epilogue that I didn't really need. Alrighty, the next question is biggest surprise of the year so far. So I have 3 books again for this one because there's just so many books to talk about and I want to talk about them all. So the first surprise that I had was Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. As many of you may know who have watched some of my previous videos, I absolutely hated Sally Rooney's other 2 books, Beautiful World, Where Are You? And Normal People. If you want to hear the 2 worst books of the year for me, it was those 2 books. But this one surprised me in a very interesting way. I actually really enjoyed this one. This was like probably a 3.5, 4 stars for me. I enjoyed my time reading it. I didn't love the characters, but I think overall as a story, it was interesting. It said something about the characters. It had a message to it. And it was just like not a waste of time, I think, which I feel like a lot of literary fiction can be for me sometimes. But this one was actually interesting to me. I haven't watched the show. I don't plan on it because I don't think I'd really enjoy it. But the book was actually quite good. I thought the drama between the characters was just so fascinating, and I actually really loved the writing in this book as well. One thing I will say about Sally Rooney is that she has wonderful writing. I just don't love her storylines, I guess. This one is just like the classic, you know, affair story, but it was very interesting to me. And I really loved the very complex relationships that the main character had, and also her very fragile mental state throughout the book. I thought that that was so fascinating, and it really added to the story and to her character. I feel like the other books by Sally Rooney just lacked that extra element that this book had, to me, in my opinion. But yeah, overall, really enjoyed this one, and I feel like there's just so much subtext to unpack. It had some really wonderful lines that I loved, and overall just enjoyed it. The next book that really surprised me was Blue Skin Gods by S.J. Sindhu. This book was our Reading Color Book Club pick for May, I believe, and I honestly picked this because it like fit the theme for the month and our co-host, and it seemed like it was going to be an interesting read, but I honestly didn't think I was going to love it. And honestly, guys, I loved this one so much. It's probably a new favorite for me, and I loved the author's other book, but I didn't think that this concept would really vibe with me as much as the other one did. This book is a really great one if you are looking for a book that explores just a ton of really interesting themes. It discusses religion, you know, superstition, relationships with families, romantic relationships, the idea of gender and like how fluid it can be, and you know, sexuality and so many other things. And I felt like it was done so well, and I feel like the way that the author crafted the story was just so detailed and intricate and like so masterful. I feel like we discussed this in the live show, and me and the co-host Sagarika were just so amazed and like dumbfounded by the little things that the author had sort of placed into the story that brought it all together. And I thought it was just so fascinating, and it just really surprised me in a big way. I think I just ended up loving it so much, and it had so many layers to it. So if you're looking for a very layered book, pick this one up. And then the last book that really surprised me was In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. I read this book for a video where I read Kayla or Books and Lala's favorite books, or like 5-star reads, so 3 of them, and this was one of them, and it was one of her favorite books of 2021, I think. And personally, again, I don't read a lot of thrillers, and I don't usually like love them so much, but this one I picked up and loved from beginning to end, every moment of it. I loved the characters. I thought they were all so flawed and messed up and weird, and I just loved reading about them. I thought they were so fascinating, and I thought the story was just done so well. Like the twists were just fantastic. They were pulled out at the perfect time, and there was just some really great red herrings and like things to throw you off that you were just kept on the edge of your seat the entire time. So overall, I felt like it was a fantastic thriller and like mystery. So this was definitely a new favorite for me, especially in terms of thrillers. And I feel like I just went into it not thinking I was gonna like love it as a new favorite, and it ended up being exactly that for me. The next question is your favorite new author. So this can be an author that's a debut from this year or one that's just new to you. So the one that I'm gonna pick is N.K. Jemisin, and I particularly read her book The City We Became this year and absolutely fell in love with it. And honestly, this is the only book I've read by this author, but I think I am naming her my new favorite author because I was just so blown away by The City We Became that I know I'm gonna probably love her other books, specifically the 5th season trilogy, which I know so many people love. This book was our February Read and Color book club pick, and I absolutely fell in love with it, and it actually really surprised me. This is definitely one that is like another biggest surprise for the year, because I went into it thinking that I was gonna like it, but I wasn't gonna love it, and it definitely ended up being a new favorite for this year, like definitely in my top 5, I think, or top 10 for the year, because the characters were just so fantastic. It was such a well, crafted and mastered story, and just the way that she pulls out different details about the city, about the characters, was just so fascinating. This book is basically a sci-fi fantasy, and it involves these like 5 different people who have become these avatars of the city of New York, and they are basically trying to work together to save the city from this like mysterious sort of evil that is encroaching on their universe. And it was super cool and just so weird as well. It's definitely a really weird book, but if you're into sci-fi fantasy and if you love books that sort of expand your worldview, this is definitely one to pick up. I highly recommend the audiobook if you're gonna pick it up as well, because there's different narrators for each of the characters, and like there's this whole soundscape that comes alive when you read this book, and I think it just really adds to the vibe of the story. All right, next question is newest fictional crush. So I have 2 for this one. I have Amin from Empire of Sand, who was just such a like stoic hero boy who just wanted the best for the world, but is like keeping all of his emotions in, and I just love that trope of a character, especially in romances, and he was just adorable and I loved him. And then I also personally really loved Shane Hall from 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This book in general is fantastic, one of my favorites for this year, but Shane Hall is just the perfect romance love interest that you could ever get. He is a wonderful character in his own right, has wonderful ambitions, and is like a very layered character who has overcome addiction and so many other things. And I just found him to be such a wonderful love interest as well, and the way that he was so caring for the main character, I absolutely love that. Next question is your newest favorite character from the books that you've read in 2022. So I am trying not to repeat myself with all the books that I've talked about before, so I'm picking 2 characters from 2 books that I haven't talked about yet, but just so you know, I absolutely love so many of the characters from a lot of the books that I've already mentioned as my favorites, but one that comes to mind is definitely Beatrice from When We Left Cuba by Chanel Clayton. This is a fantastic book, fantastic series as well. This character actually shows up in the previous book in the series, but that one's like a companion to this one, so you don't really need to read that one to read this one, but it like sort of helps. This book, she's the main character, and she is sort of working through this plot to kill Fidel Castro because she has a vendetta against him because of all these things that happened in the previous book, but she is such an amazing and fantastic character. This book is set in 1960s Florida, so she's dealing with a lot of like issues that women faced during that time, and I think she's such a resilient and fantastic character who had a lot of like wants that were not the traditional values of women at that time and like what people wanted from women at that time. So it was just really interesting to read from her perspective, and I just loved like her gumption and her spunk and just how awesome she was. The other character I absolutely loved was definitely Shiori from 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. I overall love this book in general. It was a fantastic book, but Shiori was definitely like the shining star in this book for me. I loved her character. She is such a wonderful heroine. She is such a warm, kind-hearted person who just wants the best for her brothers in this story and also the other people around her. And she's just like such a resilient person also. She goes through some really tough things in this book, but she comes out of it like still trying her best and, still being a good person. She starts out a little bratty at the beginning, I would say, but she has such great character growth, and I think overall she's just like a great person. Like if I had to pull a character out of a book to be my friend, I would pick Shiori because she's just so wonderful. All right, next question is books that made you cry. So this one's super easy because it's literally the first 3 books that I mentioned in this video, which were my 3 favorite books of the year. So Kaige definitely made me cry by the end because there's so much stuff that happens in this book. All My Rage is like a lesson in just trying not to get your heart broken, so definitely made me cry the entire way through. And then Know My Name, I was obviously crying through most of it just because of the very difficult subject matter, as she was describing very difficult things that had happened to her and stuff that she had to go through, and I was just like sobbing by the end of this. And yeah, again, I think it's such a powerful read that I think everyone should read. All right, and then on the flip side, the next question is books that made you happy. So two that definitely made me happy were The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang and then Book Lovers by Emily Henry, which I finished very, very recently. Both of these are romances with just some really great characters, some really heartwarming moments, and overall, they just made me really happy. I feel like romances tend to do that for me. I just have a smile on my face the entire time reading, and it's very hard to like mask my expressions because I'm just like having a great time. So these definitely put a smile on my face and just made me really happy, and were definitely the pick-me-ups that I needed at the time. The next question is the most beautiful book you've bought this year or received, and for this one I definitely had to pick Violetta by Isabel Allende, and this one was such a beautiful cover that I could not resist when I saw it in the bookstore. I saw so many like roundup list posts of books that were coming out around this time and that had the cover of this book on it, and I was like, this just looks gorgeous and I want to read it. So that's mainly the reason I picked it up, because of the cover, but it also had an interesting concept to it. It follows the life of this one woman over 100 years of her life, from the Spanish flu to our current day during COVID, and so I thought that was a really interesting concept. I am currently reading this one and I'm not so certain I love it, but I'm seeing how it's going, so we'll see. But yeah, I did just really love the cover, so I just needed to have it. Alrighty, and then the final question for this video is, what books do you need to read by the end of this year? So every time I always answer with basically all of them, all the ones that I've been saying on my TBRs and all of that. But to name a few, I have a few specifics that I want to talk about. So before the end of the year, I definitely want to read 2 specific books by the same author. So they are Alone with You in the Ether by Aldi Blake, and then also The Atlas Six. So many of you know I've actually already read The Atlas Six, but this is the newly traditionally published version, and I haven't read this version. I've read the self-published version that she originally put out, and I read that I think late last year, so I definitely want to be picking up this new version before the sequel comes out later this year as well, and so I really want to get to those 2 before the end of the year. And then I also bought one of her other self-published books, Alone with You in the Ether, which is also going to be getting traditionally published sometime I think next year, so I wanted to pick this version up before then, so I definitely want to get to it before the end of this year. It's basically just like a love story and like a heartbreaking one, and that's basically all I need to know, so I'm very excited for it. And then the other books that I need to read before the end of the year are just some of our Read and Color book club picks. So I have Rosewater by Tay Thompson, which is our pick for July. I have Pachinko by Minjin Lee, which is our pick for August. And then I also want to read The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen, which is our pick for September. So all 3 of these I want to be reading very soon in the months that they are a pick for the book club. And if you want to join in on the book club, there is a bunch of links and, you know, announcement videos and explainers and things like that that you can go watch and check out if you want to join the book club. We discuss throughout the month. I have a live show with a co-host at the beginning of the next month, and it's a great time. So yeah, very excited to discuss all 3 of these books and also read them, and I hope you will join us as well. And with that said, those are all of the questions on this mid-year book freakout tag. I feel like I'm really happy with my reading so far this year. I've read 37 books, and of those, a lot of them were really fantastic. Like, I can already think off the top of my head of 10 to 15 books that I absolutely loved from those 37. So I feel like we're having a pretty good reading year, and I hope the trend continues and that I can get to my goal of 100 books. But I would love to hear from all of you guys what your answers would be for some of these questions. Especially, I would love to hear what your favorite books or best books of 2022 are so far. Let me know down below, leave your list, because I would love to hear what you guys are loving from this year. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and for being patient with me as I've taken a little bit of a break. As you may have noticed, my voice was a little nasally in this video just because I'm still recovering from COVID, which I got recently on my break, so that's been fun. But regardless, we're here, we're making it work, and I love bringing you guys videos, so I'm trying to do more of that. If you've been curious about what I've been doing during my break, I would definitely recommend checking out my Instagram, linked down below. I post a lot about my life and what I'm doing on there, and you can also get more regular updates on my reading if you go check out my Goodreads. So go check out those links down below, and I will see you in my next video. So please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!